Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you could join us. I'm Billy Taylor. The jazz composition we just played for you was called Jordu. On behalf of the Kennedy Center and the Prince William County Public Schools, I'd really like to welcome you to a demonstration and a performance. This is Jazz on Film. Now, we're coming to you from the auditorium of the Hylton High School in Prince William County. That's in Virginia, about 30 miles outside of Washington, D.C. There are 1,000 kids right here in the audience, and we have students nationwide viewing us on satellite. Now, the crew for the broadcast, we're very proud of the fact that the crew is made up of students from the Hylton High School TV program, right? How about some noise for those students, huh? We think they're special. Playing for you today is my trio. This is Chip Jackson on bass. Steve Johns on drums. Our special guest on trumpet is Terence Blanchard. Mr. Blanchard. Terence, welcome to the school and to our program. In addition to being a great jazz trumpet player, you write music for movies. Now, that's what we're here to talk about today. Tell us a little about reading and the kinds of things that people have to do when you write music for films. Why don't you tell us, well, as a matter of fact, before you do that, why don't you tell us why you want to play the trumpet? We just heard you play trumpet.
Well, it started when I was in elementary school. I was taking piano lessons when I was a kid, but a guy by the name of Alvin Alcorn came to my school, very much like we are here today, and gave a demonstration of New Orleans traditional music. And I was so infatuated with what he was doing, I went home and asked my father for a trumpet that afternoon.
You wanted to do the same thing?
Oh, yeah, right away.
Well, you know, you're a wonderful improviser, and that means that you can make up music as you go along. And the exciting thing about that is that no matter what you do, you just make a melody and you kind of put it together as though you had written it out. How does that differ from what you do when you write for movies?
Well, the thing that's very different is that I have to write the music actually for all of the musicians to be able to play. So that means that I have to write it for the entire orchestra, all of the strings, woodwinds, brass, and percussion.
Mm-hmm. Is that hard?
It's tedious. It's very tedious. But it's also a lot of fun because writing for an orchestra, you have a lot of colors to choose from, and I get a chance to actually create the sound for the movies or for different scenes in film.
Well, now, we're going to see a clip from a film that you did the music, for which you did the music. Now, in this particular, well, tell us a little about this. It's called Till There Was You. What is it about?
Well, the movie is about a man and a woman whose paths cross each other throughout their life. Mm-hmm. And the scene that you're about to see, they're children in elementary school, and they meet for the first time. And what the director was looking for here was a sense of magic in the middle of the scene because they do meet for the first time. But it's also a very playful scene. Then it takes a turn because at the end of the scene, she's just a little older, so we see a difference in her age, which has to be reflected in the music as well.
So, well, let's see that.
Where's your pass? Well, Nicholas? I need a teacher! Get me talking. His name was Johnny Hasenschmidt. He was the first boy I met after moving to Los Angeles. Debbie, he'd probably be my boyfriend now if my dumb parents hadn't forced me into private school. But if they hadn't, we wouldn't even know each other. Let's play someday. You first. Someday, I'll have contacts. Someday we'll be grown-ups. Someday someone will love me more than life itself. Someday my whole life will be completely different. Except we'll still be friends.
Look, forget that guy from second grade. There could be somebody out there, like perfect for you. Someone you don't even know yet.
Now, that was kind of interesting to me because I noticed that it started off. Was that actually him playing the piano? Or was that just
no.
He's just dubbed in.
No, the guy by the name of Mike Lang, who actually had to sit there and watch the kid play and mimic what the guy was doing on film.
When you write for something like that, and he starts off, he's playing the piano, and then you have the guy coming in to chase him. Was the girl that fell? That's the
Yes, that's the same woman that you see who's sitting on the piano in the very next cut.
Now, in the next cut, they're older.
They're older, and the music has to be a little more mature for them because they're older, and the conversation that they're having is a much more mature one.
Now, in terms of writing for this, what do you do? Do you have to write differently for dialogue or anything like that?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about this is that when you write for dialogue, depending on what the director wants, sometimes dialogue may be dispensable. Sometimes that may be the only thing the director wants to hear. This next clip that we have, it's a very playful scene where you have this Nicholas Dawkins character who's much older now. He has a job, he's an architect, and he's actually flirting with this character played by Sarah Jessica Parker. And there's a lot of playful dialogue, and the director actually told me, he says, well, I want these key phrases to stand out. Now the other phrases, the music can kind of take the lead. And the other thing about it is kind of a comedic thing, so you don't want to really give away the joke beforehand.
You want to step on the punchline.
No, not at all. So the music has to be written out very meticulously in very detailed fashion for these types of scenes.
Well, let's take a look at it.
Yeah.
Also, on the condition that I'm a full partner, like he stated, and on the further condition that he designs it.
Full partner? Would you excuse us, please, just for a moment? Excuse me. Oh, boy. I shouldn't have done that. I mean, were you serious about me designing?
Highly. I enjoy bending people to my will. Sue me. I just felt like helping you. But I guess nobody's allowed to do that, huh? Because you don't need anything from anybody. Am I warm? The story of your life. Tell me the story. Start from the beginning.
Well, maybe this is the beginning.
Miss Landfield, we got a deal.
Timo, I know you think I'm not ready to take this on.
I know you're not, but look, Nick, once you start down this road, there's no turning back, okay?
I won't want to.
Now, in that film, that was one type of thing that you've done. But you've worked a lot with Spike Lee, and you've done a lot of major motion pictures with him. Was your first film with him?
Yes. The first film that I actually ever written, fully scored, was Jungle Fever. Actually, but I worked with Denzel Washington in Mo Better Blues, and I was his coach. So I got a chance to write.
Coach for playing the trumpet?
Right. So I got a chance to write one scene in Mo Better Blues, which actually started my career in this business, because Spike said, well, you have a future in writing for film, and that's when he called me to do Jungle Fever. And Malcolm X was my second picture.
Oh. Well, it was a major motion picture, and tell us how you worked with the director and how you created the melody, which was used as the main theme for the song, the picture.
Well, the interesting thing about that movie was, you know, Spike brought me on very early. You know, we were finishing Jungle Fever and he was talking about Malcolm X, which is kind of unusual because usually they bring me on a little later. But when we were talking about the melody and the theme for the film, he kept saying, look, it has to be very melodic. I want people to be able to walk away from the theater singing it immediately. So I'll show you. Let me show you. What I did was, it's my background as a jazz musician.
Well, piano was your first instrument.
Yes, piano was my first instrument. And I started to come up with this melody. Now that's the beginning part of the melody. Now, as I said, with my background as a jazz musician, I constantly hear chord progressions.
Sure.
You know, so I kept hearing something like. Now, interestingly enough, when I came up with that, I said, well, that sounds cool. So I gave Spike a tape of that.
Right.
And he didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
No, he didn't like it at all. Because he kept saying it sounded like a jazz tune. Because you kept having the chord progression. Right? Which just sounded like something that we normally play with jazz bands. So I had to figure out something to do because I really believed in this part.
Yeah, nice melody.
So what I did was, for the opening scene, for the opening credits, I took away all of the harmony and just wrote an arrangement that would focus on the melody. So in the beginning of the picture, you have a big crash with percussion and cymbals and stuff, and you have the lower strings playing. That's a little more dramatic than what you heard before.
Yeah, especially when you change, we have all the instruments and how large an orchestra was it?
Well, the orchestra was very large. We had about 66 members in the orchestra, plus 40 singers in the choir. So about 100.
So you had all that to work with?
Yeah, 106 people. Another thing that was interesting was I changed the key of the original, from the original, to suit the trumpet, because the trumpet was going to be the main instrument playing the melody. And I wanted the theme to have such a very vocal quality to it that I wanted it to be in the register of the instrument that really sang. So I changed keys to help that as well.
Yeah. In terms of that melody, how do you do that? Or could you just play it on the trumpet? You played it on the piano for a minute. Would you just that part of it?
Well, let me see. Well, I'll play it for you in the key that it's done in the film.
Okay.
The opening credits.
All right. No, that takes on an entirely different quality when you play it on the trumpet from when you play it on the piano.
Oh, definitely. I get a chance to bend some notes, extend the phrasing a little bit, and use some vibrato.
Right, makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. Well, now we've heard it at the piano, and we've heard you do it on the trumpet. Let's see how you actually used it in the theme. Now, where in the picture is this, and what did you do with what we're about to see?
Well, what we're about to see is probably the last scene in the film. It's called The Eulogy. And actually this is taken from the actual eulogy of Malcolm's funeral. And you're going to hear Ozzie Davis giving the eulogy, just like he did at Malcolm's funeral. And there's a lot of footage of Malcolm's life, just kind of chronicling things, events in his life and career. And the music is kind of like the glue that holds it all together.
Let's see that.
The person you know as Malcolm X is no more.
The assassination of Malcolm X was an unfortunate tragedy, and it reveals that there are still numerous people in our nation who have degenerated to the point of expressing dissent through murder, and we haven't learned to disagree without being violently disagreeable.
Here, at this final hour, in this quiet place, Harlem has come to bid farewell to one of its brightest hopes, extinguished now and gone from us forever. It is not in the memory of man that this beleaguered, unfortunate, but nonetheless proud community has found a braver, more gallant young champion than this Afro-American who lies before us, unconquered still. I say the word again as he would want me to, Afro-American. Afro-American Malcolm. Malcolm had stopped being Negro years ago. It had become too small, too puny, too weak a word for him. Malcolm was bigger than that. Malcolm had become an Afro-American, and he wanted so desperately that all his people would become Afro-Americans too. There are those who still consider it their duty as friends of the Negro people to tell us to revile him, to flee even from the presence of his memory, to save ourselves by writing him out of the history of our turbulent times. And we will smile. They will say that he is of hate, a fanatic, a racist, who can only bring evil to the cause for which you struggle. And we will answer and say unto them, did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him?
You haven't done the right thing.
Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance? For if you did, you would know him. And if you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. However much we may have differed with him, or with each other about him and his value as a man, let his going from us serve only to bring us together now. Consigning these mortal remains to earth, the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, which after the winter of our discontent will come forth again to meet us, and we shall know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so.
And so today, May 19th, we saw...
That was a very powerful use of a very simple theme that you played for us on the trumpet and on the piano, and to pull all of those different scenes together with that kind of impact. What kind of effect did it have on the people who were playing?
Well, that's one of the interesting things about how music and film can come together to create a very powerful statement. Because when we were recording the music, the musicians did a fantastic job of playing the music, but they were really unaffected by it. until we actually went into the booth and listened to a playback and saw it to picture. You know, there were a lot of people crying. They were very moved by the entire thing.
Yeah, you bring quite a bit to the a picture like that. I mean, as an African American, you have feelings about Malcolm, and you have many things that, growing up in Louisiana, you have that are different from someone, say, from New York. How did you feel when you were doing the music? What did that do for you emotionally?
Well, in order for me to write the music for the movie, I thought that I really had to be honest about my feelings about Malcolm X. And I had to go back and just think about how I reacted and how I thought about him as a person and where he fit in my life. And I remember the first time I heard one of his recordings, it scared me to death because I really didn't understand what was going on. I heard him speaking in terms of white devils and blue-eyed devils, and it just really scared me. And I had not a clue as to what he was talking about. He was too radical for me. And when I sat down and started to read more about his life and learned more about his entire life, and not just one section of his life, I really began to respect him as a person and as a man, because he understood that he made mistakes in life, and he tried to do his best to correct those later on in his career. So I kind of thought that most people would probably have a similar reaction to Malcolm. So I tried to draw upon all of those emotions that I had to create the music for the film.
Good. I think you were eminently successful.
Oh, thank you.
I understand that, as someone who writes music, that good music can't save a bad movie.
Oh, no. No.
What are the requirements that are needed to make a successful movie score?
First of all, a good movie. That would be helpful. But the main thing is for everybody to be on the same page. I think when you have a director and a producer who really have an idea of what they want to say with the film, that's a great starting point. And even if they don't, if they can have a conversation with the composer, an open-ended conversation, and understand the terminology and give him some kind of direction, then I think those are the tools or the keys to having a successful score.
Well, now, one of the reasons we're doing this is because we have students here who are running the cameras and who are down doing the technical things that have to do with TV production. Many of them are interested in movies. Many of the young people in our audience might want to be in movies. And so it seems to me that this is a good chance for them to find out a little about the inside of movie making, especially from an artist who is a performing artist, and yet who has another part of his career where he goes into studios and writes music for large groups and sees that unfold for him on the screen. Now, how has the composer, has the role of the composer of music for the movies, how's that role changed?
It's changed a great deal because, in the earlier days of filmmaking, the composers were responsible for all of the music. I mean, if you heard a piece of music come from a radio, or if you heard something on a television, the composer generally had to compose those things. But nowadays, with big business and people trying to sell records, you have the composer's responsibility dwindling in terms of that. Now, film companies will go out and they will buy songs. They will buy songs to put in a movie so they can sell the album later. So
for pop songs or just the things that people know and stuff like that?
Yeah, a good example of that is the movie Soul Food. Soul Food has a very successful soundtrack album out right now, and also a very good score in it. But you can see the difference in how films are made today because you have two types of music, a soundtrack and a score.
Two different things.
Yes.
Well, we've heard two versions, actually we heard three versions of the main theme from the film Malcolm X. Now, we heard one on the piano, one on the trumpet, and one with the full orchestra, which was really brilliantly done. And we'd like to maybe perform a jazz version, since you're a jazz musician. We'll see what that sounds like as a jazz piece.
Cool with me. All right.
Changes it completely.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much for the insights you're giving us on writing for the movies and how music, the same music can change, and you can take a theme and do something as a jazz piece, as a piano solo, or as a just something very special. Music is very flexible.
Yes, it is. Very malleable.
Well, let's leave the this part of the program and go into the interactive portion. Every time we do a show like this, we have to turn to the audience and say, if you have any questions for Terence or Steve or me, you can call right now at 1-800-578-1396. Now, you know, we want you to call in, and if you have any questions that you would really like to ask this very fine musician who has a lot to share, both as a musician and as a composer, just give us a call, 1-800-578-1396. So call right now. We're waiting for your call. Terence, you know, while we're waiting for the calls, would you tell us at what point in the process of making a movie that the composer is called in? When do they give you a call and say, "I want you to write a movie"?
Well, generally what happens is when the director and the producer have what they call the locked film, which means that the film is just about edited down to its completion, then they'll call me in and we'll sit down and talk about music and talk about where the music is going to go, how long it's going to be, and what the music has to do to complement the various scenes that I have to score.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, I believe we have a caller. Can we hear from the caller? We have someone on the phone? We don't have it on the phone yet, but we do have someone in the audience right here. Can you help us? Can you ask a question?
What gives you more freedom writing for concerts or for films, and do you like this freedom?
I'm sorry, can you say state the question again? We didn't hear you here on stage.
What gives you more freedom writing for music or for films, and do you like this freedom?
Well, actually, writing for my own satisfaction gives me the most freedom because I can say whatever it is that I want to say. I can tell whatever story I feel like telling that particular time. Although writing for film gives me a great pleasure too, because I get a chance to write in a different vein. I get a chance to write for a large orchestra most of the time, and I get a chance to work with great directors like Spike Lee and some other people that I've worked with. But when I write music for my own albums, it's another kind of gratification.
Thank you. Next question?
Yes. How much work did it take to compose the song for the movie Malcolm X?
Well, there's a lot of music in Malcolm X. The score, the length of the entire score totals up to be about 66 minutes, which is a lot of music. And it actually took me about 2 months to sit down and write all of the music for the film.
Thank you. Next question?
How did you get the opportunity to compose for the movie Malcolm X?
Well, it goes back to my original relationship with Spike. You know, there was a guy by the name of Hal Vick who called me to work on one of Spike's earlier movies entitled School Days. And I was just a session player at that point. And then he called me to work with Denzel Washington on Mo Better Blues, because Denzel needed somebody to help him show him how to look like he was playing the trumpet. And actually, it's me playing when you see Denzel on screen. So when we were recording the music, I sat down and played one of my own compositions at the piano. And Spike came over and said, "Well, man, what is that? I really like that composition." And I said, "Well, it's one of my own things." And then he asked me if he could use it in a film. And I said, "Fine." So then he asked me if I could write for strings, and I told him yes, even though I needed to do a little more homework in that area. But I still told him yes. And I went back and did a lot of homework and studied, called my teachers again. And once he heard that scene, then he told me, he says, "Well, you have a future in writing for film." And that's when he called me to do Jungle Fever, and that's how my film career started.
We're going to take a call from New Jersey. There's a caller from New Jersey there?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, I have a question about improvising music. Is that something that comes from experience or a talent that you just happen to acquire?
Well, it's like anything else. It's like it's something that you really have to work at. And I always use the analogy of basketball because I'm a basketball fan. When you look at a Michael Jordan just doesn't start taking off from the foul line. You know, he starts by dribbling, getting all of his skills together so he can handle the ball. And that's very much like learning all of your scales and chord progressions on whatever instrument that you play. And once you start to learn those, then you have to take the added step of learning the language of jazz, which is very much like learning French or Spanish or any other language. You have to learn the grammar, which is the theory, and then you have to learn how to put sentences together, which are the phrases. And once you start to do that, then your ear will develop to the point where you start to hear ideas over chord changes.
So you're actually composing and you're coming up with something that's very personal, as you just heard Terence do on the trumpet. We have another question here in the hall.
Yes. What do you like most about writing film score?
The thing that I like most about it is the fact that I get a chance to create sound for the film, not just music, but for different types of movies that I've worked on. When you have a large orchestra, there are a number of combinations of instruments that you can put together to create different types of sounds. And coupling that with the melodic ideas that we will use for the thematic material in the film, it really gives me a lot of pleasure, because then I could sit down and play with all of these various combinations from scene to scene.
I know that we have some people here who are actually studying TV production and working on things like that. We'll probably get a question or two from them, but we have a gentleman at the mic right now.
Who were your major jazz influences when you were young?
How old are you?
I'm 13.
13, okay. When I was just probably a little younger than you, I was introduced, or maybe, no, about your age, I'm sorry, about 13, 14 years old. And I was introduced to Clifford Brown and Miles Davis. And I used to listen to their records every morning before I went to school. It used to drive my mother crazy. But 7:30 every morning, I would put on my tape player, and I would either have Miles Davis's Someday My Prince Will Come album was playing, or either Clifford Brown, Brown and Roach Incorporated was playing. So those are my first two influences.
Yes, sir. You have a question?
What was it that attracted you to jazz rather than other genres of music?
Well, you know, the thing that attracted me to jazz was the freedom that the musicians have. Because, see, I grew up playing in pop bands. You know, I played in a lot of pop bands in New Orleans. And the horn players in the pop bands didn't do much but play the same thing over and over again. So that didn't attract me, you know, because I really wanted to be able to play my instrument. And when I started listening to these records, the Clifford Brown records and the Miles Davis records, it just amazed me at the amount of freedom that these guys had to express themselves. And once that bug bit me, the passion was something that just developed and is still developing. I've just loved being a jazz musician all my life.
We have a caller from Pennsylvania. Yes, sir. How are you?
Yes.
Okay.
I was wondering, how do you break into the world of film scoring? Do you submit examples of work to directors, or do you have to be like a famous musician first?
That's a very tough question, because a lot of the people that I know have all kind of fell into it backwards, but there are ways. What some people do is they become assistants to other composers. Like, I don't know if you know the TV show, how many people know the TV show L.A. Law, and you seen that show?
Have you guys seen that?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
The guy who writes the music for that is the guy by the name of Mike Post. And what Mike Post does, he has a couple of composers who work under him. And when they become good enough, sometimes he'll let them do a scene or two. And then eventually, they may branch off into doing their own television shows. So that's one way you may want to think about trying to do it. It's to become an assistant to another composer.
Yes, right here in the hall.
What has influenced your music when composing for films?
Say again, I didn't hear you.
What has influenced your music when composing for films?
What has influenced what?
Your music.
The mic seems to go out there.
Okay.
What has influenced? Say it right in the mic, please.
All right. What has influenced your music when composing for films?
What has influenced my music?
Music and personal performance.
For films?
For films or personal?
Yes,
or for films?
Well, other film composers, honestly. You know, Thomas Newman is probably one of my favorite composers. He composed the music for a movie that's called Shawshank Redemption, which is a great movie. Ennio Morricone is another great composer. Elmer Bernstein, Jerry Goldsmith. When I treat my film career the same way I treat my jazz career. You know, when I wanted to be a jazz musician, I had to sit down and do homework and study the music and study all of the various trumpet players to learn the history of the trumpet. So when I started becoming a film composer, in order for me to be taken seriously, I really had to do a lot of homework there as well. So I've been, even now, I'm still doing it. I rent films, I rent movies, I buy the CDs, I listen to the music, and I sit back and study what other composers have done.
We have a caller from Kentucky.
Yes, I'm enjoying your program.
Thank you.
I'm with the Jefferson County Public Schools, and I was wondering, are you working on any special projects at the moment?
Well, you know what? I just finished a project that's going to be out next month that I'm very proud of. It's a movie entitled Eve's Bayou, which stars Sam Jackson, Lynn Whitfield, and Debbie Morgan. Directed and written by a first-time director by the name of Casey Lemons. She's a great writer. She's written a lot for television, but this is the first time she's done a major motion picture. And I just finished working on a project that's going to be on HBO in January entitled Gia. I was working with Marvin Worth, who's a great film producer and a great music lover, as you know, for many years. And the director, his name is Michael Christopher.
Another question from here in the hall.
Are you going to compose any more music for upcoming movies?
Upcoming?
Yeah, you just mentioned a few. But, and those were basically, one was for television, but...
Well, I do have a couple other projects that I'm working on. I'm working on a project for the BBC. It's a documentary entitled The American Dream. And then I'm also going to work on a movie in January with Sidney Poitier for also... I think it's for Showtime.
Thank you. Yes?
How long does it take to score a movie?
Long time. Generally, it will take me anywhere from a month and a half to 2 months. But what's starting to happen now is that with the schedules that you have in Hollywood, they're cutting the schedule shorter because they're making more movies and they try to have the turnover rate. They're trying to up their turnover rate. So now I may get anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to write the music.
Doesn't take them any shorter time to produce the movie, just shorter time to write the music.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
Hi. What obstacles did you overcome writing the score for Malcolm X?
Well, there were a lot of personal ones. You know, there was, as you know, the movie garnered a lot of attention when we were making it. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the making of the movie. Just to give you a tip, when I'm in the movie in one scene, and when we were doing our scene, we had bodyguards all over the place. It was almost as if this movie were being made by the CIA because there was a lot of secrecy around every aspect of making the movie. So sometimes those distractions can be annoying. But the thing that was the saving grace was it was a great movie to work on, and it was a great story to tell. And I was very proud to be a part of that process. And I tell Spike all the time that I'm always indebted to him because he could have went out and got a big-name person to do that film, but he really trusted me with that project, and I'll forever be grateful to him for that.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Kevin Snodgrass, and I'd like to say how you doing. That was real nice.
Can you speak right in the mic, please?
I said I'm Kevin Snodgrass, and I'm saying, hello to y'all. And what styles of music do you use when composing for films? Do you use any special types?
With types of music?
Yeah.
It'll run the gambit. Obviously I'm a jazz musician, so that's my first love. And I've also studied the European classical tradition. So, it'll go from the European classical tradition to jazz. In this last film, this clip that you heard from Till There Was You, we had more of like a pop thing on that one little scene with a man and a woman bantering back and forth. And the movie that I just finished, we even used a little bit of some reggae rhythms in some parts of the movie. So it really depends on the movie. The movie really will tell you what it needs, and you just have to sit down and really be honest and try to do the best job you can.
How do you write movies? What do? Do you have say, shot of the film, or do you have what kind of machine do you play that on?
Well, I have a video player at home, a 3/4-inch video, professional machine. And what happens is, what I do is, when I'm working on a scene, I'll play the scene and I'll loop it so it can just play over and over again. For a number of reasons. First of all, so I can get accustomed to what's happening on the scene.
In that particular place.
So I can see the colors that the director chose, the setting of that the scene takes place in, and the tempo of the dialogue, because that's also very important. So once I get a sense of that, and once I could just about see it in my mind, then the music starts to come to me, and you start to hear where the music can step up or where it needs to step back to let the dialogue stand out.
That's interesting. We have a caller from Arlington, Virginia, right here in Virginia.
Good morning, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Blanchard. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I have sort of like a twofold question. My first one is with Terence. What made you decide to go from the piano to the horn?
Well, that really happened at an early age. You know, like I said earlier, it was a guy by the name of Alvin Alcorn. You know, I'd been studying piano lessons since I was 5 years old. And when I heard this guy come to my school and play, I was really infatuated by what he was doing with an instrument, because he could bend notes. It seemed like the trumpet was the lead of the band, and he just stood out, and that just attracted me. And I remember going home. My father had just bought a piano, and I remember going home asking him for a trumpet, which he wasn't too pleased about.
Bad timing. Bad timing.
Not at all.
Okay, and my second question is related to both of you, Mr. Taylor and Mr. Blanchard. I've been listening to jazz for at least 30 years, nothing but that, and I've decided within the last 5 years to get off the chair and actually start playing, sort of like self-talk. Do you think that I need to find myself a teacher to take myself to the next level?
Well, you probably would save a lot of time since you started late. A teacher could save you a tremendous amount of time, because the teacher could point you in directions that would help you progress much faster than you could by trial and error.
Agreed. I definitely agree.
Yes, sir. Right here in the hall.
Hello, Terence Major. I'm Curtis Love Jones. And my question is to you, was your trumpet made especially for you?
Well, actually, this one was. Yes, it was. It was made by a guy named David Monette. And as you see, the mouthpiece is made on. I think he did that so I won't lose it. That was my first thought. But actually, and you see all of this bracing in between and here as well. And it's also a very heavy horn. His whole idea behind the design of this trumpet is that with lighter trumpets, if the metal vibrates too much, that the sound gets lost in the vibration. So he tried to make the horn as rigid as possible. It's almost like a sports car, you know, so that this metal won't vibrate, only the bell. You can hear the bell ring, so that the sound really projects. So when I started playing this horn, I fell in love with it right away.
You've been having that for how many years?
Say again?
You've been having that for how many years?
This particular horn I've been having close to 10 years.
Thank you very much. We have a caller from New Jersey. Yes? Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
My name is Peter. I'm from Passaic County Tech in Wayne, New Jersey.
Okay.
Yes, I have two questions. I have one question for the trumpet player, which is, like, what CDs did you put out lately, or do you have on the stores? And my second question is, like, do you prefer that trumpet, or can you use any other trumpet, just play as beautiful as you do? Just like...
First of all, the records. What are your new records?
Well, my latest record is entitled The Heart Speaks on Columbia Records, and I just produced one for a singer where we're doing an album of Negro spirituals with a jazz band, and I'm also performing on it too as well. That's a very interesting project. It'll be out in April. This horn, I really love playing this horn more so than any other horn that I've ever had. The notes are very centered. It really projects. When I play in concert halls, I don't necessarily feel like I have to use a microphone. When I record with it, you get your beautiful sound in the studio. And I've just loved this horn for a number of years. And oddly enough, the guy who makes this horn wants to make me another one.
Great.
But I love this one. So,
so you're not ready to give that one up
no,
yet?
not at all.
That's great. In the auditorium.
Hi, I had a question. How do you progress from being a childhood musician to such a successful composer?
Well, a lot of that has to do with the amount of time that you put in with your instrument. Again, I use the basketball analogy. You know, you always heard the story of Magic Johnson being out on the basketball court all day and all night dribbling the ball. Well, if you want to be successful in anything, you have to spend that kind of time with it. And that's what I had to do with the trumpet. You know, I made a lot of sacrifices when I was young, and I'm the better for it now. Sometimes I hated it when I was a kid because there was a lot of social things like dances and stuff like that that I kind of missed out on. But it paid off in the end because I really love playing my instrument. I feel like God has given me a gift and a talent to play this, and also He's blessed me with a career where I get a chance to play on a consistent basis. So if you spend the time with it, you'll reap the rewards. It's just a matter of you sitting down with it and putting in the time.
Well, Terence, I'd certainly like to thank you for being with us. You've added immeasurably to our understanding about what it takes to not only play the trumpet, and a special trumpet at that, very well, but some of the things that need to be done if you are really concerned about writing for the kind of motion pictures that you've been doing. And don't you think that was very informative? Did you learn anything out there from Terence? All right. Well, I'd like to thank Terence for being with us, and I'd also like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us. And I want you to give yourself a big hand. You're terrific. Thank you for all those wonderful questions. And remember, you can ask us more questions on the internet. And for 2 weeks, we'll be able to answer your questions. All you have to do is use the address that's appearing on your screen. Now, our next program will feature the American Ballet Theater Studio Company, and they'll be demonstrating classical ballet techniques. We're going to close with a Miles Davis composition. You know we're jazz musicians, so we want you to make sure that you hear some good jazz. This is a composition written by Miles Davis, and he calls it Four.